are about to go into a conversation with Marvin and the team. They are going to be talking about being intentional about your path and opening all the doors. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Marvin Ward Jr., Tion Tulich May, Nikita Austin, and Yanni Hernandez Rana to the Black Tech Fest stage. Please give them a massive round of applause.
All right, welcome everyone. Nice to see so many faces. Some of you have probably already met me at the stall today, but my name's Tion Tulich May. I'll be moderating the panel today. We're going to be discussing the topic of being intentional about your path and opening all doors. Before we get into that, a bit of background into myself. So I've been at the company for around 4 years in total. Started off as an apprentice for 1 year before I went to university. Went to university for 1 year, came back and done an internship for about 10 weeks, and then finished my degree, and then 2 years ago joined as a full-time employee, and now currently the deputy team leader for our EU Energy and Materials team in our company financials group. So that's a bit about me. Now on to our panelists from my left.
Hi, I'm Nikita Austin. I don't know how to go after Tion's impressive time at Bloomberg, but I've been at Bloomberg now for 8 months. I'm on the training team for the data team, and that means I cover all things like communications, training, events, media production, and I've spent the last 10 years in a totally different space in the programmatic ad tech world. So that's me.
Hi, everybody. My name is Marvin Ward Jr. I run the data management lab with Bloomberg. I'm actually quite new to Bloomberg. I joined in April of this year. I'm coming by way of UBS, and before that, JPMC. Kind of the point of the data management lab is to make it easier for all of you to use Bloomberg's data. So I'm going to put that plug out there. But very much looking forward to talking to the group today. And on to Yanni.
Hi, my name is Yanni Hernandez Rana. I've been at Bloomberg for 21 years across 3 different locations. So I've worked in New York, I've worked in Mexico, and I've been in London for 11 years. And I've been kind of across products, so working in ops, then working in client support, and then relationship management, and now moving over to product.
Thank you, guys. So as you can tell, a lot of experience in our panel. But going back to the topic, being intentional. When I think of being intentional, I think of doing something with a purpose. But I'm interested to hear, and I'm sure you guys are too, from our panelists, what does being intentional mean to you guys? Let's start with Yanni.
So for me, being intentional is really about not staying still, like not being stagnant. So I think for a long time in my career, I was a technical expert in my area, and I kind of embraced that. And then maybe 6 years ago, I decided that I wanted to start making jumps in the firm, and every 2 years, that's kind of the goal I set for myself. So I moved into a completely different area of the company, and then started making those jumps, and that's how I've landed now in product development.
And Marvin.
Sure. So actually, I'm gonna bite a little bit of what Patricia said, because what Patricia said the last session, right? I think the most important thing from my perspective is having a target and sort of understanding what direction you're going in, right? If you don't know what direction you're going in, it's very hard to sort of plan what you're doing. So for example, way before I got into financial services, I worked for the government in the U.S. for an agency called the Congressional Budget Office. And the way that I became acquainted with this place is when I first got into public policy, I was doing a lot of work in energy policy, climate change, all of that. And I was consuming a lot of what CBO had to offer, what they wrote about the subject. And I was just fascinated by it. I was amazed that there was this group of people who spent all of their time just nerding out about policy and being able to produce these reports that helped other people make appropriate decisions. And so when I was consuming this, I wanted to make that transition from a consumer of this information to being a producer. How do I help other people make decisions? So I spent a lot of time. I applied for a CBO 3 times, by the way, and I didn't get it until the 3rd time. And really, what I was doing in the interim was like continuing to invest, and that actually sort of carried me through a master's in public policy. I got my PhD in public finance. And that was really sort of what unlocked the opportunity. And it's not that I'm working directly in public finance now. Obviously, I'm with Bloomberg. It's been a trip here, but the goal itself is what created the traction. The goal is how I aligned my effort and how I knew where to invest.
And Nikita, what does intentional mean to you?
Wow, can I just note again that Marvin has a PhD in, what is it? Public finance. I knew it, but it's just so impressive and amazing. But when I think of intentional, the first thing I think about is being prepared. Prep, literally just prep. I played college tennis at St. John's University in New York. So besides going to school, I was being an athlete. And I remember I had a coach who said, you're not just an athlete here, you're not just a student here. Who you are on the tennis court is who you're going to be in the real world when you're outside of this little bubble that we're in. So how are you preparing yourself for your matches, right? And at the time, I was so intense. I'm like, if I don't eat this and if I don't drink this, I won't win. And I think everyone just needs to build their, what is your prep plan? If you're going for an interview, if you're going into a meeting, are you prepping or are you just winging it? And I kind of hate that term when it comes to being intentional. If people are intentional, they're making vision boards, they're manifesting things. Do that with your career too.
Thank you, guys. Yanni, I kind of wanted to touch on one thing you mentioned earlier about jumping from role to role. Some people in the audience might think of that as quite a risky thing to do. And going to the idea of like someone's risk profile without making it too much into like a class lesson, to me, it's about identifying your willingness to take a risk. And you've got different factors that go into that. Obviously, a person's personality and what makes them an individual. But obviously, sometimes those risks pay off. So Marvin, I kind of want to ask you, or if you could share a time to the audience, a time of where you've taken a risk and it's paid off.
Sure. So I've had a number of jobs in my career, and not all of them were situations that, I didn't love every aspect of every job. I found things that I liked, but there were some things I wanted to change, right? Sometimes that was about, the scope of influence. Am I able to sort of help set the direction for the group in some form or fashion? How do I make sure that my voice is heard when I'm trying to chart a path, right? Or maybe it was about comp, right? And how do I sort of get to a level that I'm seeking? And the advice that just sticks with me is something that one of my colleagues said to me at JPMC. This is a guy who sort of operated in the most senior ranks of the bank, and the advice was priceless. So he's like, look, nobody is going to move on what you want until they recognize the cost of you not being there, right? Everybody is going to take advantage of the fact that they think you're a fixture in some form or fashion, and frankly. He's like, if you want to see that change, and you want to induce a shift in policy, then you have to be willing to take the risk of potentially leaving this situation, right? And what that ended up, that manifested basically as me going to the market and demonstrating that I did have the value that I was seeking, right? Bring the offer back, have that conversation, and frankly. They jumped into action at that point. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is going to work out that way. You have to actually be willing to make the jump, right? But that's the risk, right? With risk comes reward.
No, I love it. Yanni, I want to hear from you as well. A time in your career where you've taken a risk and it's paid off?
So when I had my last son, and he is my last child, so just, I came back from maternity leave, and I was climbing up in one group. and I was a manager. And I decided that I wanted to go to another side of the business. It's one of the advantages of Bloomberg that there are lots of different business units that you can get into. So I wanted to go to another side of the business, but I didn't know it. And in order for me to step into that side of the business properly, I would need to take a step down from leadership. So I would need to become like everybody else, you know? And so, I kind of thought about it, and this was really where I wanted to land. So came back from maternity leave, went into a role as a rep, and the people that were my peers became like my bosses, basically. And, but I did that it only took me a year because ultimately I had the skills to be able to do the job. I just needed the technical expertise to move. And I moved within a year, and actually in the space where I'm moving into product, I've only been in that space for 3 years. So, me stepping down and it wasn't even a lateral move, right? It was a move down, just helped me propel my career in a way that I probably wouldn't have been able to had I stayed and looked at leadership roles.
Thank you, thank you. Nikita, any risky situations you found yourself in? Hopefully it's paid off.
Absolutely, because every time you change your job, you kind of get a raise. So I think there were two big risks for me. One was leaving a great role at a great company to jump into a real startup. And by startup, I mean there was a CEO, a CFO, and a CTO. And they were like, Nikita, you need to sell our product. And I'm like, and you haven't sold anything yet? So the challenge was super exciting, and I was like, I know I can do this. I want to try. And it was huge. Like, even telling people about it, I'm like, I'm going to a startup with no benefits in a country that I'm not from, where I have no family. That sounds crazy. But it did pay off. Like, I traveled with the company. We grew, we tripled, we made money, we had fun. I had that real startup experience, like hire number 4 or 5, and you don't get those opportunities very often. So when I was going into this role as a customer success director, I was like, you've never done it. People aren't selling your product. People aren't buying your product. How will I do it? But it was a challenge, and I was up for it. And sometimes you just have to know that that's the path. And it has opened that particular role opened so many other doors for me that I just never even saw possible. And they took a risk on me too. When they applied for my visa, they just went to the office and applied. Like, there was no lawyer. They were like, we're smart, we're engineers, we'll figure it out. And I'm like, okay. But, it worked for everyone. It really catapulted my career, I think.
No, that's great, that's great. So guys, more of the story, take risks and prosper, of course. Marvin, I want to touch upon something you've mentioned. So getting an idea of like what you're worth to the market, your value to the market. We've got, I'm assuming, a lot of people in the audience who are relatively early in their career. I'm relatively early in my career. I kind of want to understand, and I'm sure the audience do too, how do you actually go about getting a sense of your market value? How do you figure out what you're worth? Yanni, do you have any ideas surrounding this?
I think I would say, as people of color, we have been sort of conditioned in this environment where you have to be like the best. You have to get the best grades, and you have to just keep your head down, be the best, and do your work, and people will notice. People will not notice. You need to go out there and be an advocate for yourself. And the other piece of it is that because we grow up in this environment where I'm American, so we don't have A stars, but we have A's, right? So your parents are like, you need to get an A, you need to get an A, you need to get an A. And, we always think that translates into our adult life, right? So when we become adults and we're looking at jobs, we're thinking, we'll see a job description and it's like, oh, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. Oh, but I don't have this thing, or I don't have this skill, so I'm not going to apply for the job. If you have 50% of what it takes for the role, apply for the role. Because at the worst, you're not going to get the job, but you get experience interviewing and getting a feel for what people are asking for. And at the best, you'll get the job. And you can learn. We all have a capacity to learn, so.
What about you, Nikita? Do you have any ideas of how you can go about getting your sense of market value, or maybe a time you've got a sense of your market value, perhaps?
I think this is a really, really hard thing to learn, and I'm still learning it myself. You only learn by going out there and doing the networking. I like to call it professional friend making, but I know networking is hard for some people and it's hard to talk about, but it's just professional friend making. Like, you want to be around the people that encourage you and support you and push you, and you want to do the same for yourself. But you really have to go out there, apply to the jobs, get those LinkedIn alerts, speak to the recruiters, have their WhatsApp numbers. You need to go out and make sure you understand how the ecosystems work if you're trying to play in it. It doesn't make sense to sit there, kind of say, I hope someone notices that I'm doing really great. That, I've done that. It didn't work for me ever. I've always had managers come to me and say, why didn't you speak up in that meeting? You wrote the recap after and you gave us all the ideas. And I'm like, well, I didn't know if I don't know. And I had to work so hard to push past that barrier. So practice, prep for this, push yourself. I think that's my take on it.
Thank you, thank you. And Marvin, yourself, market value.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in there. So one thing I kind of want to touch on something you were saying, Yanni, about your parents, right? In no uncertain terms, the reason I'm sitting here today is because of my parents, right? It's the things that they told me, the things they didn't tell me, the way that they acted was a continuous education in how I should pursue my goals. And I owe them, a tremendous amount for that, right? And I would say, like, as much as I appreciate that, and I do, that is a sincere belief. It is also the case that sometimes we disagreed on how I was going to manage my career, and it was okay, right? I mean, I knew we were coming at it from the same place. We wanted to see success. We just had different ways of going about it. And really, when I think about it, like my mother, she's from Cleveland, Ohio. Her mother worked in an all-white, all-girls religious school, and that's why she was able to attend, right? So it's sort of my mom, the only little black girl kind of in this school. My dad was born in Arkansas in the segregated South, right? In the 1950s, literally, there's signs segregating what water fountains you're using, right? And my folks, sort of connected and decided, coming from very poor beginnings, really like humble beginnings, that they wanted to make some different choices than the rest of their family was going to make. So they decided to leave and move together to a totally new part of the country to pursue work, right? And this is kind of the path. This is the thing that they were showing me without ever actually saying it. But at the same time, they came up, and during a period of history, at least in the US, where a lot of people looked at sort of black people operating in corporate America as a gift to the employee, right? This is something that they should be grateful for because it's something that they didn't really deserve, but they're getting this opportunity anyway, right? And that, as proud as my parents are and were during this time period and all the work they put in, that had an effect. There were some things they were willing to ask and some things they weren't willing to ask. And that's really, kind of where most of our kind of disagreements, not in a bad way, but where we don't see eye to eye on this sort of thing. And so like, I guess I want to stress that even if it feels like you're in a position where you need to be grateful for a job or some version of that, you should be grateful, but also realize it's a contract. Also realize that it's a contract between two parties, that you are the only one who's going to manage your career. And you need to make choices that are consistent with your objectives, right? Set that objective, pursue it. Don't let some uncertainty about whether or not you're going to rock the boat sort of get in the way.
Definitely, I can definitely resonate with that. It kind of gives me the idea and the sense that we find ourselves in environments where sometimes we're slightly constrained. So they could be due to like generational reasons or causes. Nikita, I feel like you're eager to jump in. Do you have an example of when you've been in an environment where you felt quite constrained, and how did you go about navigating that environment?
I have a lot of things to say, but what I will say to that point, the generational, I guess, issues that we're trying to break through, like changes, things that we're trying to do differently from our parents or just a couple years older than us. I think a really pivotal point for me was during the BLM movement of 2020 with George Floyd. That wasn't my first BLM rodeo, so, you know, I was here now, I was a little bit older, a little bit more senior in my career watching these things happen. I remember that we did the media blackout day at the company that I was working for, but we were still working. And I'm like, well, I am sorry, I cannot be working. As a human being, I'm not functioning properly, and I can't be working through this and acting like it's okay. And I wrote in the company Slack channel and said, well, since we're doing a media blackout day, let me tell you, you can find me today at the protest because that's what we were supposed to be doing, not just pretending everything is okay. And I know that if I told my parents this, and maybe they're watching, if I told them that on the day, they would have been like, you go back in there, apologize, erase it, and go into work and do your work because they might fire you. And I, of course, had those feelings as I was typing it. I had my copywriter friends look at what I wrote. I checked with my manager and made sure she was okay with me saying this. And she said, of course, I support you. This is your form of protest. And if you don't do it, who's going to do it? We're all going to pretend like it's okay. And I could no longer live like that anymore in the workplace. And, you know, that story I tell some people and they're like, I can't believe you did that. But I had to, and it has changed me, it's changed my career, and I took the risk.
No, I love it. Again, some wise words. Yanni, I want to come to you with the exact same question. Any environments you found yourself feeling slightly constrained, and how did you go about navigating that environment?
I actually want to pivot back to you because I'm conscious that everybody here is American except for Tian. And I think one thing that I'm really coming to realize is that the Black experience for Americans is very different than the Black experience for British people. So Tian is British, so I want you to speak about, you know, what constraints you've had or generational things or upbringing, like how is being Black British in the working world, you know, how has that impacted you? Or
I mean, putting me on the spot here a little bit. But no, I definitely agree. Obviously, it's a different experience between like the US Black experience and the UK Black experience, and even between us within the UK Black experience, I think it's different. For me, I can only speak on myself, obviously. For me, I would say it's mainly social mobility, and obviously, if you go way back, that ties into race, obviously. But my grandparents were the first to come here from the Caribbean, and my parents are the first generation to be born here. So obviously, it's even a different experience for my grandparents and my parents for me. So the way I kind of think about it is, okay, my grandparents came over, my parents came over. I'm actually the eldest of 7, so I always feel like I have to, I know, right? Wow. I always feel like I have to be the one to make that change and kind of show not only my younger siblings, but also my family that it's not just about, I don't know, doing your traditional jobs like being a teacher or whatever the case may be, but it's about doing anything and everything you feel like really doing, really. I feel like that's a good answer to that question. Yeah.
It was great.
Thank you. So we kind of spoke about constrained environments, and we're not always about the negative, obviously. We want to focus on the positive. Anything that you guys can share regarding positive environments you've been in and how they've helped accelerate or assist your career? Marvin, I want to put this forward to you first.
Yeah, so I think certainly I've had my share of negative experiences pretty much early on, but from a positive perspective, I think where I felt the most supportive and where I had the most growth is where when I had a team environment and a manager, importantly, who was personally invested, who understood that we had different experiences, and was curious about what my experience was, right? Actually cared enough to investigate and to do so in a way such that we both benefited from our different perspectives. The other portion of it was, sort of just creating an environment where curiosity was rewarded, right? Those environments were celebrating learning and getting better at your craft and working with other people to make the whole team better. Right, so.
Yanni, same question to you. Positive environments that you've been a part of?
So I think for me, maybe kind of like a turning point for me is I have kids, and I have older kids, and I have younger kids. So with my older kids, I say like my older kids really gave me focus, like did uni and then like worked to try to get them, to a better place than I was when I was young. But my younger kids gave me presence. And, now I think like, do I want to just work, or do I actually want to make the environment, like, do I want to make work, like the corporate world, a better place for my kids? And I think for me, that's why I'm involved in panels like this. That's why, like, anytime work asks me to, do any events or recruiting or anything, like, I'm really passionate about it, because I want to do the hard work now so that by the time my younger kids are, working, these aren't barriers anymore for them. So I think for me, that's like one positive thing. Like spaces like this, we need them.
Definitely agree. Nikita, exact same question to you. Positive environments you found yourself in?
Yeah, I think the most, I'll tell you a story about the beginning of my career. There was another black person in the office or my team, and we never really spoke to each other. And it was so sad, because we'd see each other and we'd nod, and we'd just like, we don't want them to see us talking to each other, so let's just act like we don't know that we're the same thing. So there was a lot of that in the beginning of my career, and I'm so sad that that was happening for me. And such positive spaces for me in my working life has been around other black people. So I have completely flipped this for myself. Again, I had to internally just work so hard and say, okay, you know what? Every time I see a black person, I'm going to go up to them and I'm going to ask them, what do they do? And it's so easy to do that at Bloomberg, because the office is so big and the pantry is huge and there are black people everywhere. And we're, I have not been scared to, Tyler, who's here, I literally pretended to go grab a cookie and I said, Tyler, hi, we have to be friends now. And that's how we became friends. So, my positive experiences in the workplace have been built on building my group of my people that, we're all in this together and we have to do it together, so.
No, I love that story, especially the cookie hand story.
It's so funny that you say that, because I feel like that at work as well. I like always give like black people like the nod or like the Hunger Games salute, like I see you. Do you see me? Let's be friends,
No, definitely. I'm sure we've all been there. To me, it sounds like a lot of these positive outcomes have all started with some sort of action. And it's moving away from that idea of like being passive, right? Because it's so easy for you to just like do your job, put your head down, and just get on with it, right? And go back home. But if you really want to be intentional and have your purpose, there has to be some movement away from the passiveness. So I'm interested to hear, Marvin, do you have any ideas about how you can actually go about moving away from being passive?
Yeah, I think this is going to sort of, in some ways, repeat what I was saying before about the target portion. I think you have to think about your career as not just your current job, right? You have a career, not just the job by itself. If you want to manage that career, you have to think about the life cycle, right? You have to think about what investments am I going to make to actually get to where I want to go. right? And there's going to be, you know, adversarial situations. There's going to be some friction along the way, but the way to manage that is to have confidence in yourself, to invest in yourself, to make sure that if you're talking to somebody about whether or not you're qualified for a role, you have the ability to demonstrate that you are, right? Just lean in that way and make the investments that are going to get you from A to B. Choose that target and move towards it.
Definitely. You definitely have to think about your career, prioritize yourself. And it kind of ties me into my next question. And I'm sure a lot of you guys are interested to hear this question as well. But what can we be looking for in these companies to kind of identify that this company is going to allow me to be intentional and open the doors for me? Nikita, any ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to do the Bloomberg plug. They did not tell me to do this, but throughout my interviews with Bloomberg, and I had a lot, every time I ended an interview, I went right back to the recruiter and I said, they were amazing. Even if I don't get this role, I want to be friends with that person. Can you please send my thank you note to them right now? And it was like they treated me like they wanted me from day one. Like that first interview where they just said, walk me through your CV. That was such an incredible experience. From, like, if I met 8 people, I added them on LinkedIn. I kept in touch with them. I said thank you. And I just felt like a totally different person. And usually I think we're scared and grateful, and we're hoping and praying that someone's going to give us a job. And it doesn't that's not true. It's just not true. You don't have to feel that way. You know, maybe, especially as you're starting in your career, I know it's hard and it's impossible to believe, but, you know, it was an amazing experience, and I'm super grateful for that. So if you're speaking to a company and they're not speaking to you, there's something in your gut or there's an energy that you don't like, there's probably a reason for that. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be toxic. It doesn't have to be rushed. You want them to take care of you because you're going to invest in them as well, right? So those are a couple of things to look out for. How do they treat you as a human? You're entering a relationship with them. Be intentional like you're intentional when you're looking for your partner.
Marvin, do you have anything to add to that?
I don't know that was a pretty good answer. At risk of beating the drum here, I have to say that my own experience coming into Bloomberg was the same way, right? Every time I went into an interview, we had a conversation that wasn't actually just about my qualifications. It was about how do we chart a course together for the company, right? There was a co-creative element there that really drew me in because, like, I immediately felt like they were excited for the future. They wanted my input. They cared what I said, and they wanted to work together. And I've had, you know, other interviews like that too. It was, you know, Bloomberg isn't the only place, but they executed it very consistently. That's for sure. I had a lot of interviews for this job, and for sure, you know, I think it was a continuous and evolutionary conversation about where we were going. And frankly, I can still feel that today now that I'm on the inside. That wasn't just fluff, right? I still have the opportunity to execute on those things.
Before we go to Yanni, I will say something that did happen in my experience, which has never happened to me before. I had an interview with someone. We had a conversation that had nothing to do with me. I was in Ghana at the time. I had to turn off my camera because I was in the back of a hair salon, and there was noise, and there was bad Wi-Fi. And we just had the interview. We had the interview. He didn't care. And he said, you know what? That was such an amazing conversation. Can we have another talk? Not an interview. Can we have another talk tomorrow when you have better Wi-Fi? I want to see you, and I want to see your facial expressions and know what you're saying. And I was like, wow, they actually care, because that would be a waste of time for other people. So again, you know, the human experience, the feelings you're feeling, they're important.
Thank you. And then Yanni, last but not least, what would you advise the audience to look out for when they're applying for roles at these companies?
I would say two things. One, a company that lets you bring your whole self to work. You know, like we've all of our lives, especially people that are older like me, we've all of our lives been told to like mute ourselves, you know, to make other people comfortable. You want a company that lets you bring your whole self to work. You know, that's the one thing. And you know, when you come into a firm and you're interviewing, are there other people around that look like you? Because if there aren't other people that look like you, then that company's probably not at a place, you know, in terms of a inclusion perspective that you want to be at. So I would say just those two things.
Thank you, thank you. And then last question, probably one of the simplest. To the audience, can you guys just give us one piece of advice, one takeaway you'd like everyone to leave with? Yanni, we'll start with you.
Don't settle, and if you have 50% of the skills to apply for the job, go for it.
Marvin?
I'm going to sound like a broken record here. Manage your career. Just a quick aside. I remember having a conversation with a colleague, at a former firm, and he was relaying a situation where there was another person that was making his life a bit difficult, that felt like they could exert influence on whether or not this person could successfully do his job. And his response was great. It always stuck with me. He's like, sir, you may make this job uncomfortable for me, but I have a career. I'll find another one, right? Because I know what my skill set is, and I know what my value is in the market. So you manage that career, and you'll be in the same position.
And Nikita, one piece of advice for us.
Yes, kind of to Marvin's point. I have quit a role without a job in front of me. I was very close in the end stages, but I have done it because I know and I learned that it's not worth it to stay in a toxic situation, in any toxic situation, but especially not in a work toxic situation where you have to be there all day long, because that follows you home, it follows you to your sleep, and it follows you right back when you go in the next day. So don't stay in the toxic places.
Thank you, guys. A lot of wise words. Just to sum up, already clapped, thank you. Just to sum up, just take these wise words, and remember to go out, open your doors, be intentional with regards to your path, and then I'm sure you'll reap those rewards. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.